Hey Rayleigh, and anybody else watching, and welcome back to another message from your father. So today, Leviticus 14 and 15. What have we been looking at? Regulations regarding a couple different things. So we looked at regulations regarding food, purification, random diseases as well. Again, we couldn't specify specifically what those are. And then beyond that, we also looked at molds and mildews. Going to look at a little bit more of that today with the actual cleansing from skin diseases, cleansing from those mildews, and then also from bodily fluids as well. So all of that again in 14 and 15. So chapter 14. The Lord said to Moses, "These are the regulations for the diseased person at the time of his ceremonial cleansing when he is brought to the priest. The priest is to go outside the camp and examine him. If the person has been healed of his infectious skin disease, the priest shall order that 2 live clean birds and some cedar wood, scarlet yarn and hyssop be brought for the one to be cleansed. Then the priest shall order that one of the birds be killed over the fresh water in the clay pot. He is then to take the live bird and dip it, together with the cedar wood, the scarlet yarn, and the hyssop, into the blood of the bird that was killed over the fresh water. 7 times he shall sprinkle the one to be cleansed of the infectious skin disease, and pronounce him clean. He is then to release the live bird into the open fields. The person to be cleansed must wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and bathe with water. Then he will be ceremonially clean. After this he may come into the camp, but he must stay outside for his tent for 7 days. On the 7th day he must shave off all his hair. He must shave his head, his beard, his eyebrows, and the rest of his hair. He must wash his clothes and bathe himself with water, and he will be clean. On the 8th day he must bring 2 male lambs and 1 ewe lamb, a year old, each without defect, along with 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil for a grain offering, and 1 log of oil. The priest who pronounces him clean shall present both the one to be cleansed and his offerings before the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Then the priest is to take one of the male lambs and offer it as a guilt offering, along with the log of oil, and he shall wave them before the Lord as a wave offering. He is to slaughter the lamb in the holy place where the sin offering and the burnt offering are slaughtered. Like the sin offering, the guilt offering belongs to the priest. It is most holy. The priest is to take some of the blood of the guilt offering and put it on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The priest shall then take some of the log of oil, pour it in the palm of his own left hand, dip his right forefinger into the oil in his palm, and, with his finger, sprinkle some of it before the Lord 7 times. The priest is to put some of the oil remaining in his palm on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on top of the blood of the guilt offering. The rest of the oil in his palm the priest shall put on the head of the one to be cleansed, and make atonement for him before the Lord. The priest is to sacrifice a sin offering and make atonement for the one to be cleansed from his uncleanliness. After that, the priest shall slaughter the burnt offering and offer it on the altar, together with the grain offering, and make atonement for him, and he will be clean. If, however, he is poor and cannot afford these, he is to take 1 male lamb as a guilt offering to be waved for an atonement for him, together with 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with olive oil for a grain offering, a log of oil, and 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, which he can afford, one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. On the 8th day he must bring them for his cleansing to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting before the Lord. The priest is to take the lamb for the guilt offering, together with the log of oil, and wave them before the Lord as a wave offering. He shall slaughter the lamb for the guilt offering and take some of its blood and put it on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The priest is to pour some of the oil into the palm of his own left hand, and with the right forefinger sprinkle some of the oil from his palm 7 times before the Lord. Some of the oil in his palm he is to put on the same places he put the blood of the guilt offering, on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The rest of the oil in his palm the priest shall put on the head of the one to be cleansed to make atonement for him before the Lord. Then he shall sacrifice the doves or the young pigeons, which the person can afford, one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering, together with the grain offering. In this way, the priest will make atonement before the Lord on behalf of the one to be cleansed. These are the regulations for anyone who has an infectious skin disease and who cannot afford the regular offerings for his cleansing. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "When you enter the land of Canaan, which I am giving you as your possession, I will put a spreading mildew in a house in that land. The owner of that house must go and tell the priest, 'I have seen something that looks like mildew in my house.' The priest is to order the house to be emptied before he goes in to examine the mildew, so that nothing in the house will be pronounced unclean. After this, the priest is to go in and inspect the house. He is to examine the mildew on the walls, and if it appears greenish or reddish depressions that appear to be deeper than the surface of the wall, the priest shall go out the doorway of the house and close it up for 7 days. On that 7th day, the priest shall return to inspect the house. If the mildew is spread on the walls, he is to order that the contaminated stones be torn out and thrown out into an unclean place outside the town. He must have all the inside walls of the house scraped and the material that is scraped dumped off into an unclean place outside the town. Then they are to take the other stones and replace those, and take new clay and plaster the house. If the mildew reappears in the house after the stones have been torn out and the house has been scraped and plastered, the priest is to go on in and examine it. If the mildew is spread in the house, it is a destructive mildew. The house is unclean. It must be torn down, its stones, timbers, and all the plaster, and taken out of town to an unclean place. Anyone who goes into the house while it is closed up will be unclean till evening. Anyone who sleeps or eats in the house must wash his clothes. But if the priest comes to examine it, and the mildew is not spread after the house has been plastered, he shall pronounce the house clean, because the mildew is gone. To purify the house, he is to take 2 birds and some cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop. He shall kill one of the birds over the fresh water in a clay pot. Then he is to take the cedar wood, the hyssop, the scarlet yarn, and the live bird, dip them into the blood of the dead bird and the fresh water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. He shall purify the house with the bird's blood, the fresh water, and the live bird, the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the scarlet yarn. Then he is to release the live bird in the open fields outside the town. In this way, he will make atonement for the house, and it will be clean. These are the regulations for the infectious skin disease, for an itch, for mildew in clothing or in the house, and for a swelling, or a rash, or a bright spot to determine something is clean or unclean. These are the regulations for infectious skin diseases and mildew. Chapter 15. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when any man has a bodily discharge, the discharge is unclean. Whether it continues flowing from his body or is blocked, it will make him unclean. This is how discharge will bring about uncleanliness. Any bed the man with a discharge lies on will be unclean, and anything he sits on will be unclean. Anyone who touches his bed must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean till evening. Whoever sits on anything the man with a discharge sat on must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean till evening. Whoever touches a man who has discharge must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean till evening. If a man with a discharge spits on someone who is clean, that person must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean till evening. Everything the man sits on when riding will be unclean, and whoever touches any of the things that were under him will be unclean till evening. Whoever picks up those things must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean till evening. Anyone the man with a discharge touches without rinsing his hands with water must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean till evening. A clay pot that the man touches must be broken, and any wooden article is to be rinsed with water. When a man is cleansed from his discharge, he must count off 7 days for his ceremonial blessing. He must wash his clothes and bathe himself with fresh water, and he will be clean. On the 8th day he must take 2 doves or 2 young pigeons and come before the Lord to the entrance to the tent of meeting and give them to a priest. The priest is to sacrifice them, the one for the sin offering and the other for the burnt offering. In this way he will make atonement before the Lord for the man because of his discharge. When a man has an emission of semen, he must bathe his whole body with water, and he will be unclean till evening. Any clothing or leather that has semen on it must be washed with water, and it will be unclean till evening. When a man lies with a woman and there is an emission of semen, both must bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. When a woman has a regular flow of blood, the impurity of her monthly period will last 7 days, and anyone who touches her will be unclean till evening. Anything she lies on during her period will be unclean, and anything she sits on will be unclean. Whoever touches her bed must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean till evening. Whoever touches anything she sits on must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean till evening. Whether it is the bed or anything she was sitting on, when anyone touches it, he will be unclean till evening. If a man lies with her and her monthly flow touches him, he will be unclean for 7 days. Any bed he lies on will be unclean. When a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time other than that of her monthly period, or as a discharge that continues beyond her period, she will be unclean as long as she has the discharge, just as in the days of her period. Any bed she lies on while her discharge continues will be unclean, as is her bed during her monthly period, and anything she sits on will be unclean, as during her period. Whoever touches them will be unclean. He must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean till evening. When she is cleansed from her discharge, she must count off 7 days, and after that she will be ceremonially clean. On the 8th day she must take 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, and bring them to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting. The priest is to sacrifice one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. In this way he will make atonement for her before the Lord for the uncleanliness of her discharge. You must keep the Israelites separate from things that make them unclean, so they will not die in their uncleanliness for defiling my dwelling place, which is among them. These are the regulations for a man with a discharge, for anyone made unclean by an emission of semen, for a woman in her monthly period, for a man or a woman with a discharge, and for a man who lies with a woman who is ceremonially unclean. So I always thought that these were interesting. And there's a note in here. I know I don't usually read their excerpts. I just thought this was well said. So it's regarding chapter 15, verse 2. Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when any man has a bodily discharge, the discharge is unclean. So that's the verse. And then the text, kind of the side note here, says, some of the rules regarding sex and bodily discharges mystify modern readers, but the Israelites took for granted that God had dominion over most private aspects of their lives. The Bible does not provide a detailed rationale for these regulations. Some relate to health and hygiene. Following the rules would help the Israelites avoid venereal diseases that plagued their neighbors. Also, pagan religions commonly employed temple prostitutes, and God clearly intended for the Israelites to keep worship and sex separate. So I thought that was really interesting. Again, God created sex, and it's a very, very good thing. And yet, he still wants his people to be set apart, and so he regulates a lot of their behavior. I mean, in this aspect, it's no different than a lot of the other behavior that he's regulating for them. And I think that leads to some of my prayer for you, is that if by following all of God's commands, even in things that God allows, these people are set apart from other people, these people are made holy, then my prayer for you, Rayleigh, is that you recognize, yeah, we live under a different covenant, but you are made holy by adhering to what God says. Yeah, God allows many different types of behavior, but we should still regulate that behavior. I mean, that speaks to modesty. That speaks to so many different aspects of our lives, that we be self-controlled, that we, again, regulate our behavior to bring glory to God. Very, very important. Anyway, that is my prayer for you, Rayleigh. Know that I love you and I'm praying for you. Anybody else, know that I am so appreciative of you as well. All right, friends, we will see you tomorrow. Bye.